Picture yourself living in Rome around 150 AD, or maybe walking the streets of London in 1900. If someone told you that your entire civilization was about to fall apart, you'd think they were completely insane. After all, you're living in the greatest moment humanity has ever seen. Your military has never lost a battle, everyone uses your money, and your city attracts the smartest people and biggest fortunes from around the globe. But here's the shocking truth: just a few generations later, both of these mighty powers became empty shells of what they once were. Their great buildings fell into ruins, and their economies were completely destroyed. This reveals history's cruel irony. When you feel the safest is exactly when you're in the most danger. Most of us think history moves forward in a straight line, constantly improving. But that's not how it works. History moves in circles. Think of empires like living creatures. They're born, they grow up, they reach their prime, they get old, and eventually they die. What's really scary is that great superpowers seem to live for about the same amount of time. Whether you look at the Assyrians or the British Empire, the average lifespan is roughly 250 years, about 10 generations. The United States just turned 249 years old. To figure out where we are in this pattern, we need to look past today's political drama and examine how empires actually rise and fall. The best work on this topic came from Sir John Glubb, a British military officer and historian. In his famous essay called The Fate of Empires, he studied 3,000 years of human history. What he discovered was mind-blowing. Every single empire goes through the exact same phases, driven by changes in how people think. It's a predictable pattern of cultural and economic changes. It all starts with what he calls the Age of Pioneers. This is the breakthrough moment. It's led by tough, disciplined, and sometimes brutal people who refuse to accept things as they are. Think about early Americans pushing into the Wild West, or Alexander the Great's armies marching across the known world. During this time, people are driven by duty and sacrifice. Everyone's focused on one thing: staying alive and growing stronger. Money doesn't really exist as we know it yet. Wealth means physical things: land you can farm, animals you can raise, or gold you can hold. Currency is solid, usually silver or gold coins that have real value on their own. Almost nobody has debt because there aren't any banks to lend money. Society rewards actual ability because nature doesn't lie. If you're incompetent during the pioneer age, you simply don't survive. This harsh reality creates an abundance of energy and skill that pushes civilization upward. These people conquer their neighbors not just because they have better weapons, but because they work together better. They trust each other because their survival depends on it. This success naturally leads to the Age of Conquest, which quickly transforms into the Age of Commerce. Once they've secured their territory, the empire starts trading. The huge area they control allows goods to flow freely. Roman roads, British shipping routes, American highway systems, these are the veins that pump wealth into the heart of the empire. This is when material wealth explodes. The merchant becomes more important than the soldier. People's values shift from duty to making money. At first, this is actually good. It builds skyscrapers, universities, and hospitals. Living standards shoot up. A middle class emerges. But this massive flood of wealth plants the first seed of destruction: pride. People start believing they're wealthy because they're naturally superior, not because their pioneer ancestors made huge sacrifices. They begin taking the empire's security for granted. They stop training for war and start paying other people, mercenaries or professional armies, to fight for them. In Rome, the military went from being made up of Italian citizens to being filled with Germanic barbarians paid with coins. In America, we moved from the draft, where everyone served, to an all-volunteer military, where only a small professional group handles defense while everyone else goes about their daily lives. This brings us to the Age of Affluence. This is the highest point, but it's a trap. Society's main goal shifts from creating things to buying things. The strong work ethic that built everything starts to fade away. Why would you work 16 hours a day in a factory when you can make money by trading stocks? This is when the economy becomes all about finance. During the Age of Commerce, people got rich by making actual products: steel, clothes, ships. In the Age of Affluence, people get rich by shuffling money around. The banker replaces the merchant as the most powerful person. This change seems small, but it's deadly. The empire stops creating real value and starts just taking value from what already exists. The currency, which used to be backed by gold, starts getting watered down. In Rome, they slowly reduced the silver in their coins from 95% down to just 5% to pay for growing government expenses. In the US, we abandoned the gold standard in 1971, turning the dollar into pure paper money. This easy money creates a massive bubble in asset prices. Real estate prices explode, stock markets boom, and the gap between the rich who own assets and the poor who work for wages becomes enormous. This inequality isn't caused by political decisions. It's a natural result of the money system. The rich get richer not because they're creating new things, but because they're closest to where new money is created. This takes us to the age of intellect. As society becomes extremely wealthy, it starts worshiping theory over practice. Universities grow massively. In the pioneer age, education meant learning a trade or how to read. In the age of intellect, education becomes an expensive status symbol. You see an explosion of philosophers, lawyers, and professors who spend their time debating ideas rather than dealing with reality. While this sounds sophisticated, it actually means losing touch with practical thinking. The elite become disconnected from the real-world consequences of their ideas. They start promoting universal brotherhood and open borders. Because they've never had to fight to protect the empire, they assume security is natural and permanent. They believe that if they just talk nicely to their enemies, those enemies will become friends. Glubb noticed that in every failing empire, the ruling class suddenly becomes very pacifist and internationalist, right when dangerous forces are gathering strength outside. The intellectuals tear apart the myths and heroes of the past. The pioneers are no longer honored as founders. Instead, they're criticized as oppressors. This destroys the social glue, the shared purpose that held the empire together. A society that hates its own history can't survive a real crisis. Another major warning sign during this shift is the welfare state. In the pioneer age, if you didn't work, you didn't eat. In the age of affluence, the government has so much money that it starts supporting the population. This began with bread and circuses in Rome, free grain and free entertainment to keep people happy. It evolved into the comprehensive welfare systems of modern Europe and America. While the intention is good, this destroys people's character. It creates a class of people who see government support as something they deserve. The social contract changes from ask not what your country can do for you to what has the government given me lately. This creates a financial death trap. The cost of welfare grows exponentially while the productive economy that pays for it stagnates. The only way to keep the promises is to print more money, which causes inflation, which makes people poorer, which makes them demand more welfare. It's a downward spiral of decay. We're now standing at the edge of the final phase. The age of affluence and intellect has run its course. The money is worthless. The debt can never be repaid. The elites are out of touch. The people are divided. The pioneers are long gone and their values are forgotten. The machine keeps running on momentum alone, but the engine has died. What's coming next isn't just a recession or a political change. What's coming is the age of decadence, a period of spectacular chaos where all the system's contradictions finally explode through total collapse. This is when the internal decay meets external threats, and the structure that seemed eternal suddenly vanishes like smoke. The final phase of this cycle, the age of decadence, is the most misunderstood. Most people think decadence means wild parties, orgies, and excess images from movies about ancient Rome or the Roaring Twenties. While excessive pleasure-seeking is definitely a symptom, the real meaning of decadence is much darker. It's the period when a civilization actively tears down the very institutions and values that created it. It's a death wish. Sir John Glubb described it as the phase where society stops believing in itself. The shared story that connected the pioneer and the merchant falls apart into a million fighting groups. Us becomes me. The energy that once went toward conquering the world now goes toward destroying it from within. One of the clearest signs of this age, which Glubb saw in 10th century Baghdad just as clearly as in 20th century London, is who society celebrates as heroes. In the early stages of an empire, the heroes are warriors, leaders, or builders, people who sacrifice for everyone else. In the age of decadence, the heroes are celebrities. Glubb pointed out that in the final years of the Arab Empire, the public wasn't obsessed with generals, but with singers, dancers, and comedians. In Rome, gladiators and actors became the wealthiest and most famous people in the city, worshipped by crowds while the soldiers on the borders went unpaid. Sound familiar? In 2026, the highest paid people aren't the engineers maintaining the power grid or doctors curing diseases. They're athletes, social media influencers, and entertainers. We've put the court jester on the throne. This obsession with entertainment isn't a sign of joy. It's a way of coping. It's society-wide denial. People sense deep down that the system is failing, that the debt is impossible to pay, that the borders aren't secure, that the future looks grim. But instead of facing this reality, they escape into the digital arena. They argue passionately about celebrities' personal lives or sports games because these feel manageable, unlike the civilizational collapse happening right outside their windows. As cultural unity rots away, the government tries to compensate by expanding the bureaucracy. This is the law of increasing complexity. In the pioneer age, there were very few laws because people trusted each other. You didn't need a 500-page contract to sell a cow. You just shook hands. In the age of decadence, trust has disappeared. Everyone assumes everyone else is trying to scam them. So the government creates millions of laws, regulations, and compliance rules to force people to behave properly. The historian Tacitus wrote about dying Rome. The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. We see this in the Western world today, where the rulebook is so massive that it's literally impossible to live a single day without technically breaking some law. This bureaucracy doesn't save the system, it paralyzes it. It becomes ruled by bureaucrats. Nothing can be built anymore, not a new bridge, power plant, or factory. Everything gets strangled by environmental reviews, diversity impact statements, and permits. The empire becomes like a giant frozen Gulliver tied down by threads of its own red tape. The only thing that grows is the compliance department. The ratio of administrators to actual workers explodes. In universities, hospitals, and the military, bureaucrats often outnumber teachers, doctors, and soldiers. This friction brings the machine to a halt. At the same time, the age of decadence is marked by an explosion of internal conflict and division. As the economic pie stops growing because society has stopped producing, politics becomes a zero-sum game. During the growth phase, everyone benefited together, so political disagreements were minor. In the stagnation phase, for me to win, you must lose. The population splits into hostile camps. Glubb noted that in the Byzantine Empire before Constantinople fell, the citizens were so divided by political factions, the blues and the greens, originally just chariot racing fans who became political gangs, that they were killing each other in the streets while the Ottoman Turks were setting up their cannons outside the city walls. They hated their political rivals more than the external enemy who was coming to enslave them all. We see this negative tribalism today. Political identity has replaced national identity. Americans from different political parties often see each other as aliens with completely different moral values. This is the death of social cohesion. A house divided against itself can't stand, especially when wolves are at the door. This internal division gets worse because of currency debasement, which enters its final stage. In the age of decadence, the government has promised too much to too many people. It has promised pensions, health care, defense, and subsidies, but the productive economy can no longer generate enough tax money to pay for these promises. So the government chooses the easy path, inflation. They print money to pay the bills. In the 3rd century AD, Rome faced a massive crisis. To pay the army, emperors replaced the silver in coins with cheap bronze. The resulting hyperinflation destroyed the middle class. The merchant class that built the empire was wiped out because their savings were in currency. The only survivors were the ultra-rich who owned massive estates and could operate outside the money system, and the ultra-poor who had nothing to lose. The middle class, the glue holding society together, vanished. This is exactly what we're seeing with today's unequal recovery and the destruction of the American middle class through asset price inflation. The rich get richer because they own assets, stocks, and houses that rise with inflation. The poor get poorer because their wages stay flat while the cost of food and housing skyrockets. This economic reality destroys faith in the government. When someone works 40 hours a week and can't afford a roof over their head, they stop believing in the system. They become radicalized. They start looking for a strong man to tear the system down. Importantly, Glubb identifies the flood of foreigners as a consistent feature of the final stage. This isn't a political opinion about immigration. It's a historical observation about how empires work. As the empire becomes wealthy and decadent, birth rates collapse. Citizens are too self-absorbed, too pessimistic, or too sophisticated to have children. Rome, Athens, and modern Europe all faced population collapse in their final years. To keep the economy running, they import people from the edges of the empire. Rome invited the Goths to farm the land and join the army. At first, this works well. The immigrants are hungry and hardworking, like the old pioneers. But because the host culture is weak and self-hating, the intellectual phase has taught them their history is evil. The empire fails to assimilate the newcomers. Rome didn't turn the Goths into Romans. The Goths turned Rome into a Gothic kingdom. The melting pot stops working. Society becomes a collection of separate, unassimilated communities. When crisis hits, these groups feel no loyalty to the central government, only to their own tribe. Glubb observed that the very diversity celebrated in the age of intellect becomes the crack that shatters the empire in the age of decadence. Finally, there's a widespread sense of pessimism and disconnection from reality. The elites engage in wishful thinking. They believe the laws of economics, physics, and history don't apply to them. They believe they can print unlimited money without causing inflation. They believe they can replace fossil fuels with wind turbines overnight without causing starvation. They believe they can weaken their military and still be safe. This detachment from reality comes from being protected from consequences for too long. In the pioneer age, a bad decision meant death. In the age of decadence, a bad decision gets you a government bailout. This lack of natural selection creates a ruling class that's structurally incompetent. They're book-smart but lacking wisdom. They can manipulate complex financial models but couldn't run a simple business. They manage the decline, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, arguing about seating arrangements while water pours into the ship. This is where we are right now. All the warning signs are flashing red. The hero is the celebrity. The laws are suffocating everything. The currency is dying. The people are at war with each other. The elites are delusional. The cycle is nearly complete. But the scariest part of Glubb's analysis isn't describing the fall itself. It's revealing the speed of the final collapse. Empires don't slowly fade away. They look stable, even powerful, right up until the moment they shatter. The Soviet Union looked like a terrifying superpower in 1985. By 1991, it didn't exist anymore. The collapse is a sudden transformation. It happens slowly at first, then all at once. And in this final section, we'll examine exactly what that all-at-once moment looks like and what happens to regular people caught inside the collapsing structure when the music finally stops. The most dangerous myth we're told about civilizational collapse is that it's a slow, gradual decline that gives you plenty of time to prepare. We imagine it like slowly dimming a light over decades. But history and science tell a completely different story. The collapse of a complex system isn't gradual, it's exponential. The Roman philosopher Seneca observed this 2,000 years ago when he wrote about it. In modern science, this is called the Seneca Cliff. A civilization spends centuries carefully building its wealth, institutions, and complexity. But it can lose everything in a moment of sudden, catastrophic transformation. The Soviet Union looked like an unbreakable superpower in 1985. By 1991, it had vanished, and its citizens were selling family treasures on the street for food. The structure doesn't slowly decay. It shatters. The mechanism behind this shattering is explained by anthropologist Joseph Tainter in his theory of diminishing returns on complexity. In the early days of an empire, the pioneer age, solving problems is cheap and simple. You need food, you plant crops, you need security, you build a wall. Every investment in organization yields massive returns. But in the age of decadence, society has picked all the easy solutions. Problems become harder and more expensive to fix. To fix a failing school system, you don't just hire teachers. You create a Department of Education with 5,000 administrators, new computer systems, and diversity consultants. You spend billions for zero improvement in student performance. To fix rising crime, you don't just hire police. You build a surveillance state, a massive legal system, and a prison industrial complex. Eventually, the cost of fixing the problem exceeds the benefit of solving it. Society becomes like an engine burning massive amounts of energy, money, and resources just to stay in place. When the next crisis arrives, a war, pandemic, or debt default, the system has no reserves left to handle it. It can't tax people anymore because they have nothing left to give. It can't print more money because the currency is already dying. So the central authority simply stops working. This leads to what's called feudalization. When the empire collapses, it doesn't just disappear. Power hates a vacuum. When the central government, Washington, London, Rome, can no longer project power, when it can no longer maintain roads, police streets, or guarantee currency value, power shifts to the local level. The state effectively breaks into thousands of mini-states. In the 5th century, as Rome pulled back its armies, the people of Gaul and Britain didn't just die. They turned to the nearest powerful person, the local warlord, wealthy landowner, or bishop, for protection. They made a deal. I'll give you my loyalty and part of my harvest if you protect me from barbarians. This was how feudalism was born. In the 21st century, this feudalization will look different, but the mechanism is identical. We're already seeing the rise of corporate feudalism. In San Francisco, where public police have basically given up the streets to drug gangs, wealthy neighborhoods are hiring private security companies. These are private armies. Tech company campuses are building their own cities with their own housing, transit systems, and security forces. If you work for Google or Amazon, you're basically a vassal of the corporation. They provide your health care, food, and safety. If you lose your job, you lose your protection. We'll see a world where your safety depends not on your citizenship, but on your subscription. The public utility model of civilization ends. The private membership model begins. The economic version of this collapse is the remonetization of reality. In the age of decadence, money is just an idea. It's a number on a screen. During collapse, money returns to its original purpose, storing value and exchanging goods for survival. When paper currency hyperinflates as the government tries to print its way out of debt, the trust layer of the economy evaporates. You can't pay the plumber with a check because nobody trusts banks. You can't pay with a credit card because the network is down or merchants refuse the worthless currency. The economy returns to hard assets. Gold, silver, ammunition, fuel, and food become the new currency. We've seen this in Venezuela, Lebanon, and Zimbabwe. The most valuable person in a collapsed society isn't the hedge fund manager or lawyer. It's the mechanic, farmer, and doctor who accepts silver coins or direct trade. The intellectuals who spent their lives analyzing theories find themselves starving because they have no practical skills in a reality-based economy. The pioneers return. People who know how to build, repair, and grow things become the new elite. This terrifying transition offers a guide for individuals. Glob's history is a warning, but it's also a roadmap. If you know the cycle is ending, you don't try to save the empire. The empire is financially bankrupt and culturally dead. You can't vote your way out of the age of decadence. Instead, you must build a lifeboat. You must become a new pioneer while living in the ruins of the age of affluence. This requires a 3-part strategy. First, exit the paper system. Don't keep your wealth in obligations of the dying state. Government bonds and paper currency are like shares of a bankrupt company. Move your capital into hard money, gold, and Bitcoin. These are assets that survive the transformation because they don't depend on political authority. Second, build parallel supply chains. You can't rely on the just-in-time global delivery system anymore. You need local strength. This means knowing your local farmer. It means having an energy source that doesn't depend on the grid. It means having a community of like-minded people with different skills. The lone wolf dies in the collapse. The pack survives. Third, acquire practical skills. The age of intellect told you that manual work was for lower classes. The collapse will flip the status hierarchy upside down. Learn to fix an engine. Learn to treat a wound. Learn to grow food. These skills are the gold coins of the post-collapse world. The collapse of an empire is a tragedy, but it's also a reset mechanism. It burns away the dead weight. It destroys the bureaucracy, debt, and delusions that were choking society. The fall of Rome was a disaster for the Roman Senate, but it was liberation for the provinces being crushed by Roman taxes. The Dark Ages weren't dark for everyone. They were a period of intense localization and reorganization. We're heading into the storm. The 250-year timer has run out. The debt is due. The age of decadence is ending, and the age of chaos is beginning. But chaos is simply the ladder to the next age of pioneers. The only question is whether you'll be clinging to the wreckage of the old world or building the foundation of the new one.